A poor rancher begged, "Please bury my child." The giant bride response will shock you. When Jacob Brennan's wife died, bringing their daughter into this world, he sat alone in his Montana cabin for 14 days, watching that tiny baby girl fade before his eyes. No milk would take. No remedy worked. In his darkest hour, this broken rancher wrote 5 words that would change everything. "Please help me bury my child." He couldn't face laying another soul to rest alone. But when that letter accidentally reached the Chicago papers instead of his local church, the response he received shocked not just Jacob, but the entire town of Sweetwater. Because the woman who traveled 1,800 miles wasn't coming to help with the funeral. Helena Bergstrom had other plans entirely. What happened when this 6'3" Swedish immigrant arrived at his door? Why did the whole town gasp when they saw her? And what did she do in that first night that doctors said was impossible? The cabin smelled like death and desperation. Jacob hadn't opened the windows in 2 weeks. Hadn't changed his clothes in longer than that. The baby's cry had faded from a scream to a whimper to almost nothing at all. That silence was worse than any sound he'd ever heard. Little Anna, named after her dead mother, lay in the cradle he'd built with such hope 6 months ago. Her tiny chest barely moved. Her lips were pale. Her fingers, so small they could wrap around just one of his, had gone cold. Jacob pressed his palm against her forehead and felt almost nothing. No fever, no warmth. Just a little girl, slipping away from a world she'd barely entered. The wet nurse had tried. The doctor had tried. Even old Maria from the Yazzie ranch had come with her herbs and prayers. Nothing worked. The baby wouldn't latch, wouldn't take the bottle. It was like she'd decided to follow her mother into whatever came next. He couldn't let that happen. He'd promised Anna, his wife Anna, bleeding out in their bed, her hand clutching his, that he'd save their daughter. "Promise me, Jacob, promise me you'll keep her alive. Promise me she'll know she was loved." Those were the last words she spoke. He'd promised, and now he was breaking that promise with every hour that passed. The letter sat on the table, written in handwriting so shaky it looked like a child's. He'd meant to give it to young Jim to take to Reverend Ashford. Just a simple request. He needed help burying his daughter when the time came. He couldn't dig another grave alone. Couldn't stand at another burial without someone beside him. That was all he was asking for. Just someone to help him do the worst thing a father could ever do. But Jim was 19 and scattered and had grabbed the wrong pile of mail that morning. Instead of going to the Reverend, Jacob's letter ended up in the outgoing post to Chicago, where Jim's cousin worked at a newspaper. And that newspaper, the Chicago Matrimonial Times, printed it right there on the front page under the headline, "Most Heartbreaking Letter Ever Received." Jacob didn't know any of this yet. All he knew was that his daughter had maybe 2 days left, maybe 3 if God was cruel enough to draw it out. He'd stopped praying. What was the point? He'd prayed for Anna during the labor, prayed as she bled, prayed as she died. His prayers went nowhere. The knock on the door came at sunset. Jacob almost didn't answer it, but the knock came again, firmer this time, and he dragged himself up from the chair where he'd been sitting for hours. When he opened the door, he had to tilt his head back to see the face of the woman, standing on his porch. She was the tallest woman he'd ever seen, taller than him by at least 5 inches, broad-shouldered like a man, with arms that looked strong enough to lift a grown horse. Her blonde hair was pulled back in thick braids, and her face, it wasn't pretty in the way his wife had been pretty, but there was something striking about it, something steady. Her blue eyes looked right into him, and he felt suddenly exposed, like she could see every broken piece inside his chest. "Mr. Brennan?" Her voice had an accent he couldn't place, European, strong but not harsh. "I'm Helena Bergstrom. I'm here about your daughter." Jacob's mind couldn't make sense of the words. My daughter? I don't. Who sent you?" "No one sent me." She shifted the 2 large carpet bags she was carrying like they weighed nothing. "I read your letter in the Chicago paper. You asked for help. I'm a trained midwife and nurse. May I see the baby?" The world tilted. The letter, Chicago, paper, none of it made sense. But before he could ask another question, a weak cry came from inside the cabin. Anna. the weakest sound. Like a kitten drowning, Helena Bergstrom didn't wait for permission. She walked past him into the cabin, and Jacob was too shocked to stop her. She moved straight to the cradle, set down her bags, and lifted the baby with hands so large they made Anna look even tinier. But those hands, they were gentle, careful, like they'd held 1,000 babies before. How long has she been like this? Helena's voice was all business now, her fingers checking the baby's temperature, her pulse, the inside of her mouth. 2 weeks. Since her mother died. The birth, it went wrong. My wife, Jacob's voice broke. He couldn't finish. I understand. Helena's eyes softened for just a moment, then sharpened again with focus. How are you feeding her? Wet nurse comes twice a day. But Anna won't latch. Won't take the bottle either. She just turns her head away. The helplessness in his own voice made him want to punch something. Helena examined the baby's mouth, her throat, felt her tiny belly. Then she looked up at Jacob, and for the first time in 14 days, he saw something in another person's eyes that wasn't pity or sorrow. It was determination. She's failing because she's not getting enough nutrition. Her body's shutting down. But Mr. Brennan, Helena's voice dropped lower, more intense. She's still fighting. I can feel it. Her heart's still strong. She doesn't want to die. Jacob's knees almost buckled. Can you save her? Helena stood to her full height, the baby cradled against her massive chest, and looked him dead in the eye. I didn't travel 1,800 miles to watch another child die. Get me hot water, clean cloths, and whatever milk you have. We have work to do. For the first time since Anna was born, Jacob felt something flicker in his chest that might have been hope. Helena moved through Jacob's cabin like a general preparing for battle. She laid the baby on the table, the only flat surface that wasn't covered in dirty dishes or crumpled clothes, and started unpacking her bags with swift, practiced movements. Jacob watched, frozen, as she pulled out glass bottles, rubber tubing, packets of dried herbs he didn't recognize, clean linens, and a small leather case that looked like it held surgical tools. The water, Mr. Brennan, her voice cut through his paralysis. I need it boiling, now! He stumbled to the stove, his hands shaking as he pumped water into the kettle. Behind him, he could hear Helena talking to the baby in that accented voice, soft words in a language he didn't understand. Swedish, maybe. The baby made a small sound in response, not quite a cry, more like a question, and something in Jacob's chest cracked open. What are you going to do? His voice came out rougher than he intended. Feed her. Helena was examining one of the glass bottles, holding it up to the lamplight. But not the way you've been trying. Babies this week can't suck properly. Their muscles give out, so we have to bring the milk directly to where it needs to go. She assembled something while she talked, a thin rubber tube attached to a glass syringe. Jacob had never seen anything like it. It looked like something a doctor might use, precise and clean and professional. This woman who'd appeared out of nowhere, this giant stranger with her odd accent and her confident hands, was setting up a whole medical operation on his kitchen table. I don't have much money, Jacob said quietly. I can't pay you what you probably deserve. I didn't come for money. Helena didn't even look up. Bring me the milk now. And a clean spoon. He did, moving on instinct, his mind still trying to catch up with what was happening. She took the milk, warmed it in her palm to test the temperature, then drew it carefully into the syringe. The baby lay on the table, her eyes closed, her breathing so shallow, Jacob had to look hard to see her chest move. Hold her head steady. Helena's command left no room for argument. Just like that. Don't let her turn away. Jacob placed his rough, calloused hands on either side of his daughter's tiny head. His hands looked huge against her skull, like he could crush her with the slightest pressure. But Helena's hands, twice the size of his, moved with absolute precision. She slipped the thin tube into the baby's mouth, down her throat, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone so large. This tube goes straight to her stomach, Helena explained as she worked. She doesn't have to suck. The milk goes where it needs to go. My mother saved 6 babies this way in Sweden. Babies the village priest had already given last rites. She began depressing the syringe, slowly, steadily. We're not giving up on your daughter, Mr. Brennan. Not yet. Jacob watched the milk disappear down the tube, watched his daughter's throat move slightly as the nutrition reached her stomach. For 2 weeks, he'd been watching her die. Now, for the first time, he was watching someone fight for her life. Why did you come? The question escaped before he could stop it. My letter, it wasn't asking for. I didn't expect. I know what your letter was asking. Helena's eyes stayed focused on the baby, on the syringe, on the careful rhythm of feeding. You were asking for help to bury your child. You thought she was already gone. The doctor said, doctors don't know everything. There was something hard in her voice now, old pain underneath the confidence. Especially male doctors who learn from books instead of from life. My mother was called a witch by doctors. They said her methods were superstition, folk magic. But when their medicine failed and babies died, whose door did the desperate mothers come knocking on at midnight? She finished the first syringe and prepared another. The baby's color already looked different, less gray, more pink. Or maybe Jacob was imagining it because he wanted so badly for it to be true. I read your letter in the newspaper, Helena continued, her voice softer now. Everyone else in the boarding house laughed, said it was morbid, inappropriate, but I read between the lines, Mr. Brennan. I saw a man who'd lost everything and was about to lose the last piece of the woman he loved. I saw a baby who might still have a chance if someone who knew what they were doing got to her in time. She looked up at him then, and her blue eyes were fierce. So I sold everything I owned. Quit my job at the hospital, bought a train ticket and these supplies, and I came. But you don't even know me. Jacob's voice cracked. You traveled halfway across the country for a stranger's baby. I came because I could help, because I have knowledge that might save a life. That's reason enough. She withdrew the tube carefully and lifted the baby, holding her upright against her shoulder. And because... She hesitated, and for the first time, Jacob saw uncertainty flicker across her face. Because I know what it's like to be rejected, to be told you're not wanted, not valued. When I read your letter, I didn't see a man asking for a bride. I saw someone asking for help. That's something I can give, even if I can't give the other things men usually want. Jacob didn't understand what she meant. But he didn't ask. Because the baby, his Anna, let out a small burp against Helena's massive shoulder, and it was the most alive sound he'd heard from her in days. She took it, Jacob whispered. She actually took the milk. She took the first feeding. Helena was rubbing the baby's back in small circles. We'll need to do this every hour. All night. For at least 3 days before we know if she's strong enough to survive. It's going to be exhausting. You'll need to help me. Anything. I'll do anything. Helena nodded and handed him the baby. Anna felt warmer already, or maybe that was just wishful thinking. But when Jacob looked down at his daughter's face, her eyes flickered open for just a second, and he swore he saw Anna, his wife, looking back at him. A reminder of his promise. You should know something, Mr. Brennan. Helena was already preparing the next round of supplies, already thinking ahead to the feeding in an hour. The town is going to talk. A strange woman showing up at a widower's cabin? Living under your roof? People will say things. Let them talk. Jacob's voice was steel. You're saving my daughter's life. Anyone who has a problem with that can go to hell. For the first time, Helena smiled. It transformed her entire face, made her look younger, less guarded. Good, because we're going to be very busy, and I don't have time for small-minded gossip. The night stretched ahead of them. Every hour, Helena prepared the syringe and fed the baby through the tube. Every hour, Anna took a little more, held it down a little better. Between feedings, Helena brewed strange-smelling teas from her herbs. Teas, she said, would strengthen the baby's blood, help her body fight. She crushed dried flowers into powder and mixed them with honey, rubbing tiny amounts on the baby's gums. Jacob watched it all, his exhaustion forgotten. He watched Helena's enormous hands move with surgical precision, watched her talk to Anna in Swedish, the words lilting and gentle, watched her check the baby's pulse, her color, her breathing with the focus of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Around midnight, between feedings, Jacob finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Why aren't you married? A woman with your skills, any man would be lucky." Helena's laugh was bitter. "Look at me, Mr. Brennan, really look. I'm 6 feet 3 inches tall. I weigh more than most men. I can lift a grown sheep over my head. My hands are bigger than yours." She held one up as if presenting evidence. "Men don't want a wife who towers over them, who makes them feel small, who's stronger than they are. They want someone delicate, pretty, someone who needs protecting." Her voice dropped. "I've never needed protecting. And men hate that." Jacob looked at her, really looked, the way she'd asked. He saw the strength, yes, the size. But he also saw the gentleness in how she cradled his daughter, the intelligence in her eyes, the fierce determination that had brought her 1,800 miles to save a dying baby. And he realized that any man who couldn't see past her height to the woman underneath was a damn fool. "Their loss," he said simply. Helena's eyes snapped to his, searching for mockery. Finding none, something shifted in her expression. Not quite hope, like she'd learned better than to hope, but maybe the smallest crack in her armor. The baby stirred in her arms, and the moment passed. But something had changed in the cabin that night, something neither of them had words for yet. By dawn, Anna had taken 6 feedings. Her breathing was stronger. Her color was definitely better, not just wishful thinking. When Helena checked her pulse, she nodded with satisfaction. "She's fighting." "Your daughter's a fighter, Mr. Brennan." "Jacob, call me Jacob." Helena met his eyes. "Lena, everyone calls me Lena." Outside, the sun was rising over the Montana mountains, painting the sky gold and pink. Inside the cabin, a baby who was supposed to die was sleeping peacefully for the first time in 2 weeks. And 2 people who'd been strangers 12 hours ago were standing side by side, exhausted and hopeful and bound together by the fragile life they were fighting to save. Neither of them knew it yet, but the whole town of Sweetwater was about to wake up to the biggest scandal they'd seen in years. Because young Jim, guilty about mixing up the mail, had told his mother what happened. And his mother had told Patricia Henley at the boarding house. And Patricia had told everyone the giant bride had arrived. And nothing in Sweetwater would ever be the same. The stagecoach driver who'd brought Lena to Sweetwater made sure everyone knew what he'd seen. By breakfast time, half the town had heard about the giant woman who'd walked 5 miles to the Brennan Ranch with her carpetbags. By mid-morning, the other half knew she'd spent the night there, alone with Jacob, a widower whose wife wasn't even cold in her grave yet. Patricia Henley stood in the general store holding court like a queen dispensing judgment. She was 52, thin as a fence post, and had opinions about everything that happened in Sweetwater Valley. "I'm not saying the poor man isn't desperate," she announced to the cluster of women, pretending to shop, but really just gathering gossip. But to have that woman under his roof, unchaperoned. "What will people think? Maybe they'll think a man's trying to save his dying baby," Martha Yates said from behind the counter. Martha was 67. And had buried 2 husbands and 5 children. She didn't have patience for Patricia's nonsense. "Jim says she's a nurse, that she's got medical training." "Medical training." Patricia sniffed like the words tasted bad. What kind of decent woman travels alone across the country to a strange man's house? And her size, it's unnatural. "Did you hear she's taller than Jacob?" "What kind of woman is taller than a grown man?" The other women murmured agreement. It was easier to judge than to help. Easier to gossip than to ask if anyone had checked on Jacob in the 2 weeks since Anna died. Not one of them had brought him a meal. Not one had offered to help with the baby. They'd all decided little Anna was going to die anyway, so why bother? But now that a strange woman had showed up, now they had opinions. Dr. Samuel Grantham pushed through the store door, his medical bag in hand and irritation written across his weathered face. He'd been the only doctor in Sweetwater for 23 years. Delivered most of the babies, treated most of the illnesses, and he'd been the one to tell Jacob Brennan 3 days ago that his daughter wouldn't survive the week. There was nothing more to be done. "I'm riding out to the Brennan place," he announced. If there's some charlatan out there giving that poor man false hope with folk remedies and superstition, it's my duty to put a stop to it." Patricia practically glowed with vindication. "We'll come with you, Doctor. A woman of that sort shouldn't be alone with a grieving widower." "It isn't proper." "No." Grantham's voice was sharp. "This is a medical matter. I'll handle it myself." He didn't want an audience if he had to tell Jacob his daughter had died. And he was certain that's what he'd find. The ride to the Brennan Ranch took 40 minutes. Grantham had made it dozens of times over the years. He'd delivered Anna, Jacob's wife, her 2 miscarried babies, and finally little Anna. He'd held Jacob's hand while his wife bled to death, and there was nothing anyone could do. He'd looked at the weak, failing infant afterward and known in his bones that she wouldn't make it. Some babies were just too fragile for this harsh world. When he reached the cabin, he expected to find Jacob broken and defeated. Maybe the strange woman gone. Maybe a tiny body wrapped in blankets waiting for burial. What he found instead stopped him cold on the porch. Through the window, he could see them. Jacob was asleep in a chair, his head tilted back, mouth open, snoring softly. And the woman, this Helena Bergstrom everyone was talking about, sat at the table with baby Anna cradled in her arms. The baby was nursing, actually nursing. From a bottle, yes, but she was sucking, swallowing, her little hands wrapped around the woman's enormous thumb. Grantham knocked. Jacob jolted awake, disoriented, then saw the doctor through the window and came to the door. "Dr. Grantham." Jacob's voice was hoarse from exhaustion, but there was something else in it too, something that hadn't been there 3 days ago. Hope. "Come in." The cabin was transformed. Still humble, still rough, but clean now. The dishes were washed. The windows open. It smelled like herbs and soap instead of despair. And the baby he'd been certain was dying, had color in her cheeks. "This is Lena Bergstrom," Jacob said, gesturing to the giant woman. "She's been helping with Anna." Lena stood, and Grantham had to tilt his head back to meet her eyes. He was a tall man himself, but she had 3 inches on him easily. She held the baby protectively, like she expected him to try to take her away. "Dr. Grantham." Her accent was thick, but her English was clear. "Jacob has told me about you, about how you helped during the birth, how you tried to save his wife. I did what I could. He couldn't stop staring at the baby. But I told Mr. Brennan 3 days ago that his daughter wouldn't survive. She wasn't nursing, wasn't taking the bottle. Her body was shutting down. She wasn't nursing because she was too weak to suck." Lena's voice was matter-of-fact, professional, with no judgment in it. But Grantham felt judged anyway. "I've been feeding her through a tube, directly to the stomach, every hour for the last 36 hours. She's kept down every feeding. Her pulse is stronger. Temperature is normal. This morning she started taking the bottle on her own." Grantham moved closer, his medical training overriding his shock. "May I examine her?" Lena hesitated, then nodded. She laid the baby on the table and stepped back, but not far. Grantham pulled out his stethoscope and listened to the infant's heart. Strong and steady. He checked her color, her reflexes, the inside of her mouth. Everything he saw contradicted what he'd expected to find. "What kind of training do you have?" he asked, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. "My mother was a midwife in Sweden. I apprenticed with her from the time I was 12 years old. After I came to America, I worked at Chicago Memorial Hospital for 5 years. I've delivered over 200 babies. Saved 37 that other doctors said wouldn't survive." Lena's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "I know my methods seem strange to you, old-fashioned, but they work," Grantham wanted to argue. Wanted to say that real medicine was learned in universities, not from mothers and folk wisdom. But he couldn't argue with the evidence in front of him. This baby should be dead. Instead, she was thriving. "What's in the tea?" He pointed to a cup on the table, still steaming, nettle, raspberry leaf, and fennel, for the baby's digestion and to strengthen her blood. "The paste I use on her gums is honey, mixed with chamomile and yarrow. It helps her mouth heal from the trauma of the birth. That's not medicine. That's working." Jacob's voice cut through the tension. I don't care if it's folk wisdom or university training, Doctor. My daughter was dying. Now she's not. That's all that matters. Grantham looked at Jacob, really looked. The man had color in his face again. His eyes were clear instead of dead. He stood straighter. And the way he looked at this strange giant woman, there was something there. Respect, gratitude, maybe more. The town is talking, Grantham said carefully, about Miss Bergstrom being here, unchaperoned. People have concerns. People can mind their own damn business. Jacob's voice was flat. Lena saved my daughter's life. She's welcome in my home as long as she wants to stay. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But you should know what you're facing. Patricia Henley is already spreading rumors. And with your wife barely in the ground, my wife would want her daughter to live. Jacob's eyes blazed. She died begging me to save Anna. If people want to gossip about how that happened, they can gossip. I won't apologize for my daughter being alive. Lena stood silent through this exchange, her face carefully neutral. But Grantham saw her hands clench slightly, saw the way her jaw tightened. She'd heard this before, he realized. Been judged before, been called improper before, and she'd learned to expect it. I'm not here to judge, Grantham said, surprising himself with the truth of it. I'm here because I'm a doctor, and I was wrong about this baby's chances. I'd like to understand what you did, how you did it. Because if there are techniques that can save lives that I don't know about. He trailed off, ego warring with professional curiosity. Lena's expression softened slightly. I can show you, if you'd like to learn. They spent the next hour at the table while Lena explained her methods, the tube feeding, the herbs and their properties, the way she monitored the baby's vital signs. Grantham asked questions, took notes, and slowly his skepticism gave way to reluctant respect. This woman knew what she was doing. More than that, she understood the human body in ways his textbooks had never taught him. Where did you say you worked in Chicago? He asked finally. Memorial Hospital. In the charity ward mostly. The patients no one else wanted to treat. Immigrants, poor families, unwed mothers. Her voice was steady, but there was old pain there. The cases the other nurses thought were beneath them, and they let you go. I chose to leave. When I read Jacob's letter, when I knew I could help, Grantham shook his head slowly. You gave up your job, your life, traveled halfway across the country for a stranger's baby. Yes, that's either the most foolish thing I've ever heard or the most noble. He closed his notebook and stood. I'm not sure which yet, Lena smiled faintly. Most people choose foolish. Most people are idiots. Grantham picked up his bag and moved toward the door, then stopped. Miss Bergstrom, I'm going to tell the town what I saw here. That your methods work. That this baby is alive because of your skill. It won't stop all the gossip, but it might slow it down. Thank you, Doctor. He nodded to Jacob. You've got yourself a miracle here. Don't waste it. After he left, silence filled the cabin. Jacob and Lena looked at each other across the table, the baby between them sleeping peacefully. He was kinder than I expected, Lena said quietly. You were expecting judgment. I always expect judgment. It's easier that way. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the mountains. Jacob, the doctor was right. People are going to talk. Your reputation, I don't care about my reputation, you should. You have to live in this town. And if I stay here much longer, they'll assume things about us. About what kind of woman I am. Her voice was carefully controlled. I can stay a few more days. Make sure Anna is strong enough. Then I should go back to Chicago. Find another job. You can hire a local woman to help with the baby. Jacob stood too, moved closer to her. And if I don't want you to go? Lena's breath caught. She turned to face him, and her eyes were suddenly vulnerable. Why would you want me to stay? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything beyond payment for my services, and you've already offered that. I came to help your daughter. I've done that. My job is finished. Your job, maybe. But what if I'm asking you to stay for a different reason? The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Lena took a step back, her defenses rising. Please don't say something kind just because you're grateful. I've heard grateful words before. They don't mean anything once the crisis passes. I'm not just grateful. Jacob's voice was rough, honest. I'm watching you with my daughter, and I see something I never saw with Anna, my wife. I see someone who loves her, not because she's supposed to, not out of duty, but because she genuinely cares. He paused. And I see someone who's been hurt, who expects to be rejected. And I want to know who did that to you, who made you believe you're not worth wanting. Lena's eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. Everyone. Every man I've ever looked at twice. Every employer who hired me for my strength, but made sure I knew I wasn't a real woman. Every person who laughed at the idea that someone my size could be gentle, or kind, or want the things normal women want. Her voice broke. I came here expecting to bury your child. Instead, I saved her. And now you're looking at me like I'm something other than the giant everyone else sees. But that won't last. Once life gets back to normal, you'll see what everyone else sees. And you'll want me gone. You're wrong. I'm not. I've lived this story before. Jacob reached out and took her hand. His hand was small in hers. She could close her fingers around his entirely. But he didn't pull away, didn't flinch. Then let me tell you a different story. One where a woman saves a dying baby and a broken man and gets to stay if she wants. Where she's seen for who she is, not what she looks like. Where someone finally tells her she's enough, exactly as she is. Lena looked down at their joined hands. At this man who barely came up to her shoulder, who should have been intimidated by her size, but instead looked at her like she hung the moon. And for the first time in her 29 years, she let herself imagine it might be real. I don't know how to trust this, she whispered. Neither do I. But maybe we figure it out together. The baby stirred in her cradle, making a small sound. Not a cry, just a noise that said she was alive and present and demanding attention. Jacob and Lena both moved toward her at the same time, their hands brushing, and they smiled at each other. Outside, the sun was setting over Montana, and inside the cabin, something impossible was beginning to take root. 3 months later, the whole town gathered at the church. Patricia Henley had stopped gossiping after she'd seen Lena deliver her niece's baby when Dr. Grantham was away, saved both mother and child when everyone thought they'd lose them. Now she sat in the front pew, dabbing her eyes. Jacob stood at the altar in his only suit, waiting. The doors opened, and Lena walked down the aisle carrying baby Anna, who was fat and healthy and laughing. Lena wore a simple blue dress that Martha had helped her sew. She towered over everyone, and she was beautiful. Jacob took her hand, still so small in hers, and they stood together, this mismatched pair who'd found each other in the darkest moment. Reverend Ashford smiled. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness something rare and precious. A love born not from convenience or loneliness, but from two souls who saw past the surface to the truth underneath. Lena looked down at Jacob. He looked up at her. And in that moment, height didn't matter. Size didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the truth they'd discovered together. I never thought I'd have this, Lena whispered during the vows. A family, a home, someone who sees me. I see you, Jacob said. Every day for the rest of our lives, I'll see you. When they kissed, the whole church erupted in applause. Even Dr. Grantham was crying, though he'd deny it later. Young Jim whooped from the back pew. Maria Yazzie nodded with satisfaction. She'd known from the beginning this would work. The reception was held at the ranch. Tables set up outside under the Montana sky. Music and dancing and laughter. At one point, someone asked Lena to dance. She hesitated. She'd never danced before, always too tall, too awkward, too afraid of looking foolish, but Jacob took her hand and led her to the clearing. She was so much taller that he had to reach up to put his hand on her waist. She had to bend down to rest her hand on his shoulder. They must have looked absurd. They looked perfect. The town's changed their minds about you, Jacob said as they swayed. You saved 3 more babies after Anna, helped with that difficult birth at the Miller Ranch. Even Patricia admits you're the best thing that ever happened to Sweetwater. I don't care what the town thinks. Lena smiled down at him. I only care what you think. I think I'm the luckiest man alive. I think I wrote the worst letter anyone's ever written, begging someone to help me bury my child, and somehow got the best response imaginable. I think God has a strange sense of humor. He pulled her closer. And I think I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person. Lena's eyes filled with tears, happy ones this time. I came here expecting death. I found life instead. Not just Anna's life, mine too. You gave me back myself, Jacob, made me believe I could be loved. You are loved, completely, perfectly, exactly as you are. Later, as the sun set and the guests began to leave, Jacob and Lena stood on their porch, holding baby Anna between them. The baby reached up with her tiny hands, touching both their faces, and gurgled happily. She's beautiful, Lena whispered. Strong and healthy and beautiful? Like her mother, Jacob smiled. Both her mothers. Anna would be grateful, I think, that you saved her daughter, that you're here. Do you think she'd approve? Of us? Jacob considered this seriously. I think she'd be relieved I found someone who actually loves ranch life, who's strong enough to handle it, who'll keep me honest and work beside me and build something real. He paused. She wanted me to be happy. I'm finally happy. The letter that had started everything sat framed on their mantel now, a reminder of how close they'd come to tragedy. How one mistake, Jim mixing up the mail, had led to a miracle. Please help me bury my child, it read. But Lena hadn't come to bury anyone. She'd come to save, to heal, to love. And in doing so, she'd saved herself too. Years later, people would still talk about it. About the giant mail-order bride who'd answered the most heartbreaking letter ever written. About how she'd defied a doctor's diagnosis and saved a dying baby through sheer will and old country knowledge. About how she'd married the man who wrote that letter and built a life that became legendary in Sweetwater Valley. They'd have 5 more children together. All tall, all strong, all healthy. The ranch would prosper. Lena would become the unofficial midwife and healer for 3 counties. Jacob would never stop looking at her with wonder, even after 50 years of marriage. But that night, their wedding night, they simply stood together on the porch, holding their daughter, watching the stars come out over Montana. 2 broken people who'd found each other in the darkness, 2 unlikely souls who'd discovered that love doesn't care about height or convention or what's proper. Love only cares about truth, and the truth was this. Jacob Brennan had begged for help burying his child, and Helena Bergstrom had responded by giving him a reason to live. She'd saved his daughter's life. And in doing so, she'd saved his too. The baby cooed softly. Lena kissed her forehead. Jacob wrapped his arms around both of them, his family, impossible and perfect and real. Thank you, he whispered into Lena's shoulder. For coming, for staying, for saying yes. Lena held him tighter, this man who fit perfectly in her arms despite their difference in size. Thank you for seeing me, for being brave enough to love me, for making me believe I was worth loving. Inside the cabin, the cradle Jacob had built waited. Tomorrow they'd start their new life officially. Tomorrow the work of building a future would begin. But tonight they simply existed in this perfect moment. This answered prayer, this miracle born from desperation and distance, and one woman's impossible journey. A poor rancher had begged, please bury my child. A giant mail-order bride had responded with something no one expected. Not burial, but resurrection. Not death, but life abundant and overflowing and full of second chances. And as the Montana stars wheeled overhead and the baby slept between them and love settled into their bones like coming home, Jacob and Lena knew one truth with absolute certainty. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just the beginning of the best ones.